she survived a massacre, losing her brother, husband, and child, and took refuge where no one was supposed to find her, on the land of a former soldier who himself once believed in orders. Marshal Kane wanted to make an example of her, to chain her, hand her over to the military, and silence the memory of the San Carlos slaughter. But Caleb James didn't let the past completely destroy himself, and when the time came, he chose not fear, but redemption. But just listen to how shocking the turn of this drama was, and why justice, in the end, prevailed. At the very edge of Arizona, where the sun mercilessly scorched everything alive, stood a house, almost blending into the hills and red rocks, stone, as if grown from the earth itself, cacti by the doorstep, an old wrought iron well, and silence absolute, dead silence. This was exactly what Caleb James sought. He was nearing 50, though he looked younger, strong, tall, with a gaze that clung to the horizon as if a threat might appear there. Ever since he lost his wife and child in that terrible spring of 1879, he settled far from people, not because he hated them, but because he couldn't stand them. Words became empty, glances false, and comforts poisonous. He lived alone on the ranch, never went to town, except for salt or nails. His horses were silent companions, and his dog, Ray, was the only soul he trusted. Caleb wasn't looking for peace, he was looking for oblivion. And until recently, he found it. Everything changed the morning he discovered barefoot tracks near the corral. Small, feminine. He frowned. There were no roads here, and even the Indians hadn't set foot on this land since they were driven off it by General Long. He didn't sleep the next night. Getting up before dawn, he heard a rustle in the barn, rifle in hand. He stepped inside and saw her. A girl, young, dirty hair, braided into messy plaits, her gaze wild, sharp as a knife blade, in her hands a knife, stolen from his kitchen. He remained silent. She did not. "Kill me if you want, white man, I don't care," she said in good English, but with an Apache accent. He didn't kill her. Instead, he gave her bread. She dropped the knife, then left. The next morning, she sat on the porch, said nothing, just looked at him, and left again. This continued for several days. She appeared, watched, sometimes spoke. She didn't give her name, didn't ask to stay, but didn't leave completely either. He didn't know why he didn't drive her away, probably because he saw something of himself in her eyes, the same hunger for loneliness, the same restrained fury at the world. Finally, on the 5th day, he asked, "What do you want?" She looked straight ahead, without fear. "To stay, to help. I have nowhere to go." "Who are you?" "My name was Saya. But the name no longer matters," she said and turned to the horizon. Caleb hesitated. She was young, 20 years old, no more. There was something wild, dangerous, but not malicious about her. She resembled a Mustang not tamed, but escaped from captivity. I ask you to like and subscribe to the channel, so you will help me in motivation to make such great stories for you, and I will see that you like them. Enjoy watching, everyone. He said neither yes nor no. He just tossed her a shovel and pointed to the garden. She understood without words. A month later, Saya was still living with him. She slept in the old barn, ate at a separate table, but worked equally hard. She restrainedly cared for the horses, expertly mended the fence, and despite her young age, had hands burned by the sun and strong as a man's. But Caleb didn't know that with each passing day, when he looked at her, something inside began to tremble unsettlingly. It wasn't attraction, too soon for that. It was a dangerous feeling, as if her presence was awakening that part of his soul he had condemned to death 10 years ago. And then one day, in the scorching heat, when the ground cracked under his boots, he heard Saya crying, not whimpering, but sobbing muffled, furiously, like a wounded animal. He entered the barn. She sat curled on an old bale of hay, holding his old whiskey flask. He took it from her, but wasn't angry. "Who hurt you?" She was silent for a long time. Then she forced out, "They killed everyone. My brother, my husband, my child. White men, like you, you're soldiers." Only then did he understand. She wasn't just a wanderer. She was a refugee, a survivor of that very massacre at the San Carlos reservation. And perhaps he was there, or someone he knew, those he once called brothers. He left without saying a word, but something inside his chest cracked again. Maybe it was a heartbeat, maybe an old, forgotten sense of guilt. Or the beginning of redemption. On the third day after that conversation in the barn, Saya spoke again. Not immediately, only when Caleb was about to patch a crack in the water pipe. She quietly, but firmly said, "Were you a soldier?" He froze, without turning around. "I was." "In what regiment?" "2nd Cavalry, Fort Apache." The silence stretched. He felt her gaze on his back, like a cold knife resting between his shoulder blades. "Were you there?" she finally asked. "In San Carlos?" He wiped his forehead and slowly turned around. "No, but I knew those who were." She nodded. No accusations, no curses, just that silent, adult nod like someone too tired of hatred, but who hadn't forgotten the pain. That night she didn't return to the barn. She slept by the fence, curled up beside the dog Ray, and Caleb watched her from the porch. He thought about how little he knew about this girl, or rather woman, not by age, but by her scars, by her gaze. A 20-year-old couldn't have such a look. It's earned through years of pain. The next morning, Caleb found her in the canyon. She was riding one of his horses bareback, effortlessly, as if they were one body. The horse was young and unruly, but Saya handled it as if the blood of the earth itself ran through her. He watched her make a sharp turn, hold steady, laugh for the first time ever. The laugh was hoarse, broken, but real. When she noticed him, she immediately sobered. "I'm not stealing, I just needed to remember what it's like to be alive." "You can ride my horses," he said and left. And from then on, she often went into the canyon, sometimes for an hour, sometimes for a day. He didn't ask where she had been, she didn't tell, but when she returned, there was less gloom in her eyes. The pain remained, but no longer as a wound, as a scar. Closer to September, a rumor spread in the county. Old Jeremiah Crow, Caleb's neighbor on the other side of the ridge, had disappeared. They said riders from a ranger detachment had been seen with him, but after that, no news, no trace. Caleb remembered that Crow, a former scout and Indian hunter, was one of those who boasted about raids on the Apaches. Saya noticed a change in Caleb. He became anxious, withdrawn. "Was it you?" he asked directly one day. She silently glanced at him, no answer. Her face remained stony, only her fingers convulsively gripped the edge of the blanket. "Saya, I need to know." "What if it was?" she finally said. "Will you drive me away?" "No, but I need to know who I'm living with." She stood up, came closer, looked him in the eye firmly, almost defiantly. "You're living with a woman who was stripped of everything, who was silent for 3 years, who buried her son with her bare hands, and who wants only one thing: to no longer be a shadow." He didn't answer, he just walked out. He didn't know how to live with this knowledge. He felt anger not at her, but at the past, which had now suddenly come alive. That night he didn't sleep. He remembered faces, screams, and how he silently left when the captain ordered, "Burn the houses." He drank like he hadn't in years, until he fell asleep right on the floor. In the morning, he woke up to Saya silently covering him with a blanket. "I'm angry too, Caleb," she said, "but if we both keep burning, there'll be nothing left here." Time passed. Autumn arrived. They didn't grow closer, but they weren't strangers either. And one evening, she placed her hand on his shoulder, silently, without requests, without words. He flinched as if from electricity, but he didn't push her away. Thus, for the first time in 10 years, hope was born in him again. The first frosts came unexpectedly. The earth cracked from the cold just as the hearts of those who had endured too much cracked. Caleb chopped wood almost to exhaustion, so as not to think, so as not to feel. Saya helped silently. She learned not to ask questions. They both knew how to be near each other without touching old wounds. But more and more often, Caleb found himself seeking her gaze, and more often, he noticed she looked in his direction when she thought he wasn't looking. One day, when the wind rose from the hills and covered them in dust and cold, Caleb found that Saya was gone. The horse was gone too. The rifle was gone. At first he thought she left. Then she was kidnapped. But where were the tracks? Not a single one. He spent the night in the saddle, searched the canyon, by the creek, even at the old mine, where no one had descended for a long time. He returned in the morning and found her by the barn, dirty, covered in dust and scrapes, on her shoulder an old sack, in it a man's watch, a carved knife, a cavalry medal. He recognized the medal immediately. It was Crow. "Did you do this?" he asked hoarsely. She nodded, without remorse. He wanted me, he knew who I was, said he'd kill you if I didn't leave. He hasn't changed, Caleb, none of them change. He slowly squatted down, looked at the ground, as if answers could be found there, then he raised his eyes. And us, do we change? Saya came closer, holding the sack in her hands, like a curse. I don't know, I only know that I can't be weak again, and I don't want you to die because of me. I'm not afraid to die, he replied. I'm afraid to lose something again that matters even a little. It was a confession, harsh, dry, like the dust in these parts, but real. Saya was silent. Then she came, sat beside him, placed the sack at her feet. I don't want to kill anymore, only to defend myself, but I'm not defending myself. I'm defending you. It's scary, Caleb. I didn't want this. No home, no feelings, no you. He looked at her. Her eyes were like the sky before a storm, alive, real. And now it's too late. Several weeks passed. They lived side by side, almost like a family, but not yet one. He knew she was like a Mustang. Even if she approaches you, it doesn't mean she belongs to you. And she knew he could disappear into his silence again. Both understood what was between them was fragile, like ice in spring. But it is precisely at this time, when everything seems to have calmed down, that trouble arrives. One night, 3 men came to the ranch, 2 with badges, the third thin, in a cloak, with a rodent-like face. It was Marshal Kane from Prescott. He knew Crow, and he knew that Crow boasted he had found himself a trophy Apache in the canyons. We have a question for your guest, Kane said. You know, Mr. James, harboring someone is serious, especially when it concerns an escapee from the reservation accused of murder. Caleb stood on the porch, a rifle behind his back, fury in his chest. She is under my protection. And who are you now, Sheriff? The law? Kane sneered. We know who she is. The sister of that very Apache who burned Long's camp 2 years ago. She killed Crow. We found his knife in her saddlebag. We are just doing our job. Saya came out of the house herself. Her hair was down, her face clean. Come. I'll go with them, she told Caleb. No, he replied. You can't save me from the past, neither can I you, but if I stay, they'll come back, with a troop. He clenched his fists, but she was already walking towards the horses. You don't have to pay for what they did, he said one last time. She turned, her eyes glistened. I'm not paying, I'm choosing. The next morning, Caleb stood on the porch, in his hands, her knife, in his eyes, a storm. He knew that if he didn't go now, he wouldn't be able to later, and for the first time in 10 years, he chose not silence, but a fight. He saddled his horse, and rode after her. Caleb rode without rest, following tracks on flattened grass, by the remnants of campfires, under a sky that grew ever darker. He didn't know what he would say when he caught up. He didn't know if he would catch up at all. But he rode, because if he hadn't ridden, he would have lost not only Saya, he would have lost the only thing that had begun to beat in his chest again. 2 days later, he found them. The camp stood on the edge of a ravine. 1 tent, 2 guards, tied horses. He crawled under the cover of night. He heard Marshal Kane saying, Tomorrow we'll hand her over to the military, to Tucson. Let them decide. War with the Apaches could flare up again if we don't hang her. Any captain will tell you that. Saya didn't answer, only silence, deep, stubborn. Caleb was no hero, he was no soldier, but that night, he became something more than a man hiding from the past. He shot first. 1 guard fell immediately, the second cried out, but a bullet found him before he could raise his rifle. Kane jumped out of the tent, cursed, but Caleb was already there. A shadow with a rifle and blood-fueled anger crashed into him. The fight was short. Caleb didn't kill him, he just knocked him unconscious with the butt of his rifle. He no longer wanted blood. He found Saya tied up, but alive. Her eyes were dry. You came. He cut the ropes. Yes, and now we're both on the run. She smiled for the first time in a long while. Then let's go. They went into the mountains. Days passed, one after another, like waves after a storm. Winter in Arizona is unforgiving, but they didn't care. They weren't looking for a home, they were looking for a new beginning, without wounds, without the past, without the shackles of guilt. They hid in an old fort, long abandoned, They rebuilt their life anew, hunted, built, were silent, and talked. She told him how her brother died covering the women's escape, how she survived because a soldier took pity on a girl with a child and still shot later, how she survived because she wanted revenge, and then, she forgot why. Caleb listened. Sometimes he cried, sometimes he retreated into himself, but always he returned to her, because now he had a home, and he was alive, and Saya lived in it. In spring, they descended from the mountains, not to a town but towards new land. They weren't looking for company, they were looking for a place where they could live not as an Apache woman and a former soldier, but simply as a man and a woman. One of those nights, when the stars were especially close, Saya quietly said, "Do you think we deserve this?" Caleb looked at the sky, then at her. No one deserves peace, it has to be built, every day, within oneself, together. She squeezed his hand, tightly, like those who will never let go. When the past calls, you can hear it, but you don't have to obey. When pain speaks, you can listen to it, but you don't have to live with it forever. When the heart beats, it means hope remains. And if it exists, then there is a future. And in that distant land, where the sun once scorched everything, a new life was lit. Not perfect, not safe, but real.